All right, so I think I'm live. And this is really about opposing polarization. Because the fundamental problem that we are facing today in the world is polarization. It's not war. War is a symptom of polarization, perhaps the most stark and challenging one. It's not even climate change, because that's another symptom of polarization in the sense of that we're out of balance. There are two forces in the world, the linear and the circular. Now, normally in a healthy society, these two are in balance, the masculine and the feminine, the left and the right hemispheres of the brain, the heart and the brain, doing and being, linear and circular. However, in our society, for thousands of years now, the linear has been dominating the circular. That's a problem. But especially so for the last 300 years, since the so-called Age of Enlightenment, which is kind of ironic because it's anything but enlightened to just use half your brain. Like, imagine you had real estate and you just say, okay, half of the real estate, I'm not going to do anything with it. I'm just going to let it sit there. That wouldn't perhaps be the best use of the land. So why would we use the real estate of our brains in such a way? No, no, no. What we need to understand is that if we have two hemispheres of the brain, which we do, then it's better to use both. The situation we have in the world today is that people tend to either use one or the other. To a large extent, society promotes left hemisphere of the brain activities such as setting goals, reaching goals, those things that can be measured, asserting yourself, being extroverted, etc. Typically male traits. You see, there is a connection here, and feminism, of course, is a reaction to this because it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere around us. Like, we can't even go a day without seeing any sign of this. We're immersed in polarization to such a great extent that it's often difficult to even see it. Like the fish that cannot see the water. But actually, what do we know about fish, right? So, like the air that we breathe, the air that we breathe, it's there. We don't see it. We can maybe see it if we look at something which is very far away, that it's slightly blue, has a slightly blue hue. But because supposedly air and oxygen is slightly blue, but other than that, we can't really see the air, but it's there. If it weren't there, we would notice it for sure. So it's like that, polarization is everywhere, all around, it surrounds us all the time. Now, it's important to make a distinction between polarities and polarization, because polarities is just the basic awareness that, there is night and day, there is man and woman, there is up and down, left and right, whatever polarity you want to observe, sun and moon. And that's not really so much saying anything about reality as it is about grouping reality into different categories. Sometimes they are kind of clear, like day and night, and sometimes they're more arbitrary. So that's saying something about our minds, that's saying something about how we relate to things, how we think about things. Okay? Polarization, on the other hand, that's when we pit the two against each other, so that there is the one and the other. I think of it as football supporter mentality. It's us versus them. So it's basically the reasoning behind war. We need to go to war with so and so because it's us against them. And a lot of politics is also built on that idea, unfortunately. I mean, politics wouldn't have to be built on that idea. Of course not. Politics is basically how to manage and govern the state or the society we live in. That doesn't in itself necessitate that we define an enemy or that we have an inner enemy that we have to battle, like a right and left rhetoric. As my brother expresses it, one of my brothers, the left and right paradigm is a false dichotomy for people who are too lazy to think. Okay, I think he has a point. It's not really helping in any way. It's more like a show. It's entertainment. So whenever we see these kind of things, it's good to take a step back and say, oh, this is entertainment. Because at the end of the day, what really goes on behind the scenes and the actual politics that are conducted don't really change that much. I mean, most of the fundamentals, they remain the same. And then some things change, you know, if you vote for this or that party. Some things change, yes, but a lot of it doesn't. So a much better way to do politics would be for people who are really interested and engaged in political science and understanding how to make a good society to sit down or stand up or go out in the forest and talk, ideally, and to have intelligent conversations about how to find solutions collectively. That could very well be a way to do it. So not to have these debates, endless debates and rhetoric about who is wrong and who's, an idiot. Frankly, I don't find it very entertaining. I very rarely watch these things because it lowers the intelligence. It lowers the state of awareness. It lowers so many energetic levels that it's not about visions anymore. On the other hand, if we consider, a higher perspective to politics, Plato, for example, the philosopher, he wrote a whole book, The Republic, about politics or political science or whatever you want to call it, how to govern the state. So this is a philosophical question at the end of the day. That would be a game changer if we would move from this polarized way of doing politics, for example, politics as an example, into a higher approach. Now, what is higher than two? Two, either or, polarized. Higher than two is three. And there you have it. So it's about moving from a thinking in twos, right or wrong, correct or false. It's like schools are literally training young minds to think in two. It's either correct or it's false. We're trained to that. Now, there's nothing wrong in itself by mastering two. First we get one, then we get two, but we also have the capacity to go to three. And this is actually an important point because understanding polarities help. Getting stuck in polarization doesn't. So if rather than stopping at two and at the same time being so focused on the linear, because the linear paradigm is basically that, it's the two. It's either or. It's more or less. It's actually a one-dimensional thing. With one line, we can measure, the length of someone or how tall someone is. We can measure the weight of someone. So it's very handy for certain things. But if we want to look at all of reality, it's not very practical at all because reality is complex. So we can't really, the tendency in society is to sort of distill everything into something measurable. And typically the favorite thing to use to measure is monetary values. So everything is somehow through some economic magic transformed, and it is literally magic. It's Babylonian magic, transformed into a measurable entity, which is money. That just doesn't do it. That just doesn't cut it because reality is complex. We can't relate to reality in that way anymore. The reason that it's very practical, the reason that it's done is because it's practical, and also because that makes things easy to control. So that's a tool for control. So much better is to go to a step beyond that, to go to three. Now, three is where creativity happens. 3 is when we have the left hemisphere of the brain and the right hemisphere of the brain working together. So it doesn't have to be either this or that. Because the thing is that as much as a lot of people are into the linear, a lot of society rewards the linear, there are also those who are into the circular. It's all yoga, it's all meditation, it's all mindfulness. And basically shunning society. It's like, no, it's just that. I am a spiritual person now. But that's also a polarized position. It's like saying I'm only a spirit, I don't have a body. Then you're a ghost. And what impact does a ghost really have? Like, typically a ghost isn't what you want to be. You'd rather be a healthy human being. So where are these healthy human beings? Where are the role models? Where are the people who are actually living a healthy, balanced, harmonious life? Those are the people who should be on TV, in media, in movies. That's what movies should be about. So many movies. It's like there is this movie writing idea that conflict drives the narrative forward. So in other words, it's built on the idea, the basic premise that there needs to be conflict for any interesting story to transpire. So then it's built into the system. Now, conflict can lead to compelling narratives for sure, but it's not the only way to do things. There is something beyond 2, again 3. So with this, I want to say that I'm opposing polarization, which in itself is kind of a paradox. How can you oppose polarization? Isn't that polarization again? And of course it is. So that's a joke. Humor is another thing that is 3. If we say something and then understand it in a different way, then it becomes funny. There is the 3. So it's not so much to explain humor, because that's futile. It's more about understanding and recognizing that if we use the mind only to count to 2, then we're clearly not making the most use out of it. So I want to welcome you to a new line of thought, which is 3. I want to welcome humanity to 3. And I am actually going on a crusade right now for that, opposing polarization, opposing the divider, the devil, basically. The divider. Divide and conquer, that's the motto. No, that's not going to fly anymore. Now it's about dynamic balance. It's about harmony, inspiration, harmony, and play. Those are the 3 values that I live, that I embody, and that I also write about in my book, The Way of Phi. I have a copy here. I'll bring it out of my bag. So this is The Way of Phi. It's an interesting book, I think. I wrote it. It's a philosophical guidebook which helps you to dive into these kind of things. And there is philosophical discourse. There is a lot of exercises. It's a practical book, a lot of exercises, a lot of song lyrics as well, for songs that are written which are about these topics. And there is even a story, a narrative about a surfer. So I call this book The Way of Phi, and my work is about learning to surf on the edge of reality. So check that out. If you like this, remember to subscribe and hit the bell and all that stuff. Like it, tell your friends. But most of all, I want to invite you to stand up for something beyond 2. To move beyond polarization. To 3. Here's to 3. This could be a good way of signaling. Not virtue signaling, which I'm not too fond of, to be honest. More like awareness signaling. Yeah, that's the joke again. All right, so, but seriously, it's a joke, but it's also true. So I invite you to a higher perspective 3, you know. Let's together lift humanity to the level of 3. You know, we've been in 2 for 2,000 years and counting, because it went on before that as well. Although arguably it was maybe 1 before that to a very large extent, with the age of Aries. You know, that's the ram just going forward. That's what the ram does, going forward. And then there is the age of Pisces, two fish and swimming. So that's been on for 2,000 years. Now it's the age of Aquarius, you know. And a lot of people seem to think that the age of Aquarius, it's about AI. I think that is a kind of a well, that's certainly not all that the age of Aquarius is about. It's much more about a higher perspective on things, you know. And AI is to a very, very large extent an extension of the linear. You know, it's even more linear. It's like super linear. You know, now the computer is even smarter than humans. Blah blah blah. However way you want to define that. But that's kind of smart. That's kind of intelligent. That's the linear problem-solving mind, the engineer. Nothing wrong with that. You know, engineers are great. But if I want to get married, I'm not going to have an engineer, you know, solve the problem for me. I'd rather have someone who's, you know, emotionally oriented. Or if I'm going to have a baby, you know, I'd rather have a what are those called? Mother, the woman, typically a woman who helps the baby into the world. I don't remember the word right now. And in any case, you know, problem solving is one important, you know, dimension of living on this planet as a human, but it's not the only domain. And we can't relate to everything as problem solving, you know. And AI tends to do that. You know, it's like problem solving deluxe, you know, and it's like, oh, it can solve problems we didn't even know we had a few years ago. Okay, cool. You know, let's use that as a tool, but let's not forget who we are. Let's not forget our connection to ourselves, to Mother Earth, to each other. And let's allow both of those to be true at the same time. Not either or, either problem solver or some kind of hippie. No, let's do both. You know? Let's be present with our intellectual skills as well as our humanity. You know? And then when both hemispheres of the brain are online, you know, we can actually learn to connect the two. Juggling is a great way. Another is, a friend of mine showed me this the other day. You know, you know this. You lift your thumb and your pinky back and forth like this. Kind of tricky, but you can sort of get what I'm doing. Different ways to activate left and right, or rather, to activate the connection between the two, the corpus callosum. That's where creativity lies. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's it for me. All right, I'd love to hear your comments and your thoughts about this. And see you soon. All right.